Former President Biden's physical state was so bad in 2023 and 2024 that his aides feared he could end up in a wheelchair. That is according to a new book by CNN's Jake Tapper and Axios' Alex Thompson.
Tapper and Thompson say they interviewed more than 200 people with inside knowledge. According to the authors, Biden's aides felt using a wheelchair during his re-election campaign would have hindered him politically.
Yeah, you think? Biden's physician, Kevin O'Connor, said that Biden could be in for a difficult recovery if he were to fall again. Axios writes that aides took more precautions. Quote, they tried to figure out shorter walking paths, began insisting on handrails for steps up to the stage at his appearances, had him wear sneakers more often, changed his visual briefings before events to ensure he knew every step he was expected to take, and guided him more carefully through the movements.
Another tidbit from the book, this time picked up by The Guardian, shows the frustrations of a top campaign aide to Kamala Harris. David Plouffe is quoted in the book saying he felt that Biden totally effed us by running again, and that Harris's 107-day campaign sprint was a, quote, effing nightmare.
Author Leah Sargent responded on X to Axios' story, writing, the scoop here isn't the wheelchair, it's the lie. Team Biden said he had trouble walking because of an incompletely healed foot fracture. His doctor, both small fractures of his foot, are completely healed.
Mediaite writer and editor Tommy Christopher wrote, what's wrong with needing a wheelchair, which, by the way, Biden did not? I hope newsrooms exercise care not to let their hatred of Joe Biden lead them to stigmatize disability. I mean, more than they already have.
That is a completely ridiculous comment. This is not about stigmatizing people who need a wheelchair or have a disability whatsoever. In fact, I find I'm uncomfortable, frankly, all of the beating up we have to do on Biden's physical condition. It's not. Elderly people, our grandparents, should be allowed to retire with dignity and do things that befit their condition in life. It is their fault when they remain in office past the point of capacity. And I'm sorry, being president is a physically demanding job. You have to fly all over the world constantly. It is not, 100, 200 years ago, it was not as physically demanding. The chief executive was one government official among many, but now we have the president is by far the most important person, the U.S. president is the most important person in the world, and it requires a high degree of physical activity and physical exertion.
Well, hold on a second. I'm less dismissive than you are about the disability argument, for the simple reason that the argument against Biden running for a second term was his mental acuity. There's no problem with someone being in a wheelchair, as Franklin Roosevelt was, though it was concealed, as Greg Abbott is in Texas right now. Using a wheelchair does not prohibit people from travel internationally or otherwise, nor does it have an impact upon their capacity to be president or to have any other high-level political office. Now, the question in Biden's case was mental acuity. That's why the debate was so disastrous. If Joe Biden had been sitting down and on his game mentally, that debate would not have been a problem.
Well, sure, but these things are a little bit linked. I mean, FDR was in a wheelchair from contracting polio. It was not a symptom of him becoming older and more frail and more out of it.
But
right?
even if
Woodrow Wilson was horrifically incapacitated. He was not particularly mentally incapacitated, if I'm recalling this correctly. He was incapacitated from probably a bout with the Spanish flu that killed tons and tons of people at the time. Like, he was so incapacitated. Edith Wilson was running the government because he was in bed. His mental faculties were all there, but they were hiding the extent to which the president was no longer capable of being president. Right. You can be in such a physical condition that it bears on how you are able to do the job. And in Biden's case, we're not talking. He's not a vigorous young man who had a cycling accident and had to use a wheelchair or something. It's a little bit linked.
Well, I think we'll just agree to disagree on the wheelchair point. But to the David Plouffe point, although I think that Plouffe's achievements in the earlier Barack Obama campaigns are worthy of praise, I'm pretty skeptical of this argument that it was the brevity of Kamala Harris's campaign that was the problem. In fact, I would argue that it's quite compelling to say that she would have her best chance at the very start of the campaign, and the gloss gradually came off of that. And that, when you look at Kamala Harris's political career, the idea that more Kamala Harris makes people more likely to vote for her isn't very well supported by facts. Back in 2020, she ran for the nomination. There was this big launch in Oakland. It was very glamorous. She was considered the coming star. She ended up dropping out before the Iowa caucuses. So I know that Plouffe and everyone else in that campaign has their own vested interest in saying it was all the fault of the brevity of the campaign. Look, I think Biden shouldn't have run for a second term, but I also don't think that the problem with Kamala Harris's campaign was it was too brief.
I broadly agree with that. My only point of possible contention there is that if she'd had more time, she could have replaced the Biden campaign team who were giving her bad advice because they were trying to cover up their own complicity in this whole thing.
Well, and trying to protect his legacy.
Right, and they did not let her separate. They did not encourage her to separate herself from Biden, which was a fatal campaigning error. But she had in a 100-day campaign, you don't have time to hire new campaign staff. So if she had more time, she might have had the right people in place, is the only advantage I could see that she would have from more campaigning. Otherwise, I agree with you. The numbers could have gone off
further.
as a hot brat, Kamala, whatever fake thing that was manifested became exposed as a fake social media ploy. Up next, President Trump has pushed to lower prescription drug costs, targeting what he calls the fat shot in the process. You won't want to miss this. Stay tuned.